the Attorney General of the great state of Kansas, Derek Schmidt, who is running to be the next governor of the great state of Kansas. General Schmidt, how are you?
Boris, I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Well, anytime, A, because you're a patriot, and B, because you are in a very interesting and a vital race, and C, anything for a fellow Georgetown law grad.
Well, we'll leave C by the wayside, but I appreciate 1 and 2. I tell you what, Kansas is Trump country, and our folks here still love the president. And even though we got off track by allowing our folks to elect a liberal Democrat governor in the last election cycle, we're going to come back home in 2022, fix that problem, and get ourselves the right Republican governor.
Love to hear that. Why are you running for governor?
Well, first and foremost, because we need a new one. Laura Kelly has been a disaster for Kansas. She's out of step with Kansas values, with conservative values. Number 2, because I believe that we can put this state back on track if we've got the right voice and the right message and the right messenger. I've never lost a race in this state. I don't intend to start losing it now. The reason we lost the governor's office last time was that our incumbent only held on to 40% of the vote in the Republican primary election. So it's really critical we don't gamble with this election. We got to pick a winner. We got to elect a conservative. We got to get somebody who believes in America first, and we got to take back Kansas.
General Schmidt, obviously love to hear those sentiments. Where do you stand on some of the key issues of the day that are facing all of us as parents, as Americans, as patriots? One thing, I've got a little boy who's going back to school in September. I know you've got a beautiful family, and you're a dad of 2 daughters. Where do you stand on CRT, on critical race theory?
Well, I am just strongly opposed to it. You may know, Boris, I was the 3rd candidate for governor anywhere in this country to sign on to the 1776 Action Pledge. Number 1 was Kristi Noem in South Dakota. Number 2 was Glenn Youngkin in Virginia, and I was number 3, and obviously the first one in our race. I think that critical race theory, I call it critical race theory and CRT because that's the term we all use, but what it really is more generally, it's just this notion of anti-American indoctrination. It's the idea that there are voices in this country that have now crept into our conversation and crept into our schools that are trying to teach our kids that this country is somehow fundamentally bad or fundamentally racist, and that we have to somehow become something we are not in order to be good. And that's all just false. Look, the reality is that 1776 was a tremendously important year. I would argue an inspirational year in human history, not just in U.S. history. And the values of 1776 are the values we ought to be teaching to our kids. That happened in the Trump administration when the president set up the 1776 Commission, when he banned the use of CRT indoctrination in the federal government. And, of course, the Biden team wants to go exactly the opposite direction. In fact, the Biden Education Department just a few weeks ago actually wanted to slip mandatory CRT in as a condition of receiving certain federal grants in education. We caught them trying to sneak that in, stood up and told them, we're going to sue you if you do that, because it's not only a bad idea, it's illegal. You can't do it under federal law, and they backed down. So you just got to stand strong on this stuff. And, sometimes simple is better. And the simple answer to all of this is that those of us who are patriots and believe in and love this country just have to always stand up and never be ashamed or shy to say it. The kids notice that example.
General Schmidt, let's talk about the border. Every town a border town. Where do you see the impact of the absolute ineptitude of the Biden administration? And maybe it is not acts of omission. Maybe it's acts of commission of letting this flood of illegal immigrants into our country. How's it impacting Kansas? And what are you doing to mitigate Biden disaster?
It's an absolute disaster what Biden has done on the border. President Trump actually had the border in relatively good shape, certainly the best shape it's been in many, many years, maybe ever. And in 6 short months, the Biden team has managed to not only undo all of that progress, but make things worse than they've been in a very long time. There were more border interceptions in July of this year than we've seen in, I think it was 21 years or something like that. So things are going the wrong direction fast. And here's what it means for a state like Kansas. Look, we're not on the border, but we're not that far. At our closest point, we're only about 500 miles from the border. So we're not a frontline state, but we're a second-line state. And we see a lot of impact from bad actors coming across the border. In any big population, there's always a subset that are just bad actors, and that's true with folks who are crossing the border illegally as well. So we've seen on our watch in Kansas, we've seen people who have been murdered by illegal immigrants here. We've seen attempted murder. We've seen child rape by illegal immigrants here. I'm not saying that's everybody, but I'm saying that in those cases, with those victims, for those Kansans, that crime should never have occurred because those people should never have been allowed in the country. So this is real. It's a public safety issue for our communities. And we've got to stand up and say, fix the border. You know, the governor of Texas, Governor Abbott, and Governor of Arizona, Governor Ducey, they called for all other governors to send them some assistance. Not so much to patrol the border. That's got to be a federal deal. But to deal with the crime and the other sort of consequences of bad actors flooding across the border. About a half dozen states, I think maybe a few more, have now answered that call. And I really think Kansas ought to answer it as well. Governor Kelly has just sort of poo-pooed the idea. She called it political games. And I found that phrase offensive. I mean, I guess she could disagree. That's her prerogative. She's the governor right now. We're going to fix that. But she doesn't have to be dismissive. This is real for a lot of people in our communities.
Now, most Americans know that Kansas is a true patriot, MAGA, ruby red state. Tell us a little more about how in the world the beautiful America First state of Kansas ended up with a Democrat governor.
Well, Republicans circled the proverbial circular firing squad and shot at each other and then couldn't get over it for the November election. I think that's kind of the bottom line. We had an incumbent Republican governor in 2018, was only able to hold on to 40% of the Republican primary vote. 60% of our voters who showed up and voted for somebody else other than the fellow who held the office. And then there was so much disunity coming out of that primary that our eventual nominee lost. Laura Kelly only got 48% of the votes. That's back in 2018. There was a third-party candidate in the race who sucked off a very small percentage, but she still won by 5%, which is a pretty big number for a Democrat to win by statewide in Kansas. So here's the bottom line. I always say it this way. Laura Kelly didn't win that race in 2018. Republicans lost that race in 2018, and we need to not repeat that error. We got to rally around one strong single candidate who's a proven winner, keep our eyes on the prize of taking back Kansas in November of 2022, and I believe we're going to get that done. But part of it is, there's some terrible things that have happened in this country because Joe Biden became president. But you always got to look at the half, glass full, I suppose, or the glass half full. And one of the things that's going to come out of that is that our patriots in the Kansas Republican Party are motivated more than ever to win back this state and win back our elections, and I believe we're going to do it.
Well, I love to hear that, and sounds like you are that candidate for Kansas to coalesce around, because another candidate in the primary is that former governor who only got about 40% of the vote last time. He's trying to do it again, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he's my friend, but at the end of the day, he's already lost this race once, and we can't risk losing it again. So I'm in. We're swinging. We're getting the base and the rest of our Republicans rallied around us. The support so far is fantastic, and we're just keeping our eyes on the prize. The goal here, the point, the whole purpose of this election is to defeat Laura Kelly, who in many ways has been as bad or worse than governors like Gretchen Whitmer or Gavin Newsom. She just hasn't gotten as much attention. And in order to do that, we've got to be focused on it from right now. We don't have the luxury of piddling around and navel gazing until sometime late next summer.
Well, we have about a minute left. And in that minute, I want to talk more about what you just mentioned, about the current governor of Kansas being as bad as the far-left extreme governors in Michigan, in California, on the mask mandates, on the lockdowns. Tell our listeners more about that.
Look, our governor thought in April of last year she had the power to make it a crime for Kansans to gather together and go to church for the purpose of congregate worship, or at synagogue, or at a mosque. She was going to apply it to everybody. I stood up and went toe-to-toe with her and said, "You can't do it, Governor." And eventually a federal judge agreed. And, of course, she couldn't do it. She didn't have that power. And then a couple months later, she thought she had the power to sort of wave a wand and declare that some businesses are essential and others are non-essential. I've never seen a non-essential business in my life, but that's a whole different story. And close down one batch and allow the others to keep on going. And our legislature, our Republican majorities, we worked with them. They stood up and said, "You can't do that either." And then she thought she had the power to order all of our schools to close at the start of this last school year. And we said, Governor, you can't do that either. That's a local decision that has to be made under our law. So she's just been terrible on COVID. Her instinct is wrong, and that's the big picture point here. Her instinct, like Whitmer's, like Newsom's, has always been sort of the nanny state approach. I'm in charge. You have to listen to me. I'm going to order. I'm going to mandate. I'm going to command. The right answer, of course, has been those governors whose instinct has been to trust individual liberty and to trust freedom. The governors in Florida and South Dakota and Texas and many other good Republican governors. And I just think, look, for me, my philosophy has always been there is no public health or emergency exception to the U.S. Constitution. We've got to respect people's rights all the time, not just when it's easy and convenient. And right now, that means things like no mask mandates, no vaccine mandates, no vaccine passports, no more intrusive government control. Give people good information, trust them to make good decisions, let them live their lives, and we got to move on down the road.
There you heard it. Kansas Attorney General Derek Schmidt sounds to me like the right man to be the next governor of Kansas. General Schmidt, where can people find you?
Boris, we've got, of course, an online presence. Our website is schmidtforkansas.com. That's SCHMIDTFOR Kansas.com. And we welcome carrying on this conversation. We're going to get this right, and we're going to win this state back.
General Schmidt, thank you so much. God bless you. God bless your family. Good luck in the race. Folks.
Thank you.